New York City, 1977, a serial killer is hunting couples sitting in parked cars. He leaves behind cryptic letters, mocking the police, and claiming a demon speaking through a dog ordered him to kill. For more than a year, the city lived in fear of one man. His name was David Berkowitz, and the world would soon know him as the Son of Sam. In the summer of 1976, the city of New York was already a place of tension and uncertainty, struggling with crime, financial collapse, and fear spreading through neighborhoods after dark. Yet nothing could prepare its residents for the terror that would soon grip the streets and turn ordinary nights into moments of dread. Because somewhere in the shadows, a man had begun hunting strangers, targeting couples sitting in parked cars, watching quietly before raising a gun and pulling the trigger without warning, leaving behind a trail of blood, confusion, and unanswered questions that would eventually reveal the identity of one of America's most infamous serial killers, a man who would come to be known as the Son of Sam. The man behind the name was David Berkowitz, but at the time nobody knew who he was or where he lived, and the mystery only made the fear more powerful, because each attack seemed random, each victim ordinary, and each night carried the possibility that someone else might become the next target. The first attack took place on July 29, 1976, when two young women, Donna Loria and Jody Valenti, were sitting in a parked car in the Bronx after returning from a night out, talking casually, as people often do at the end of an evening, when suddenly a man approached the vehicle and fired several shots through the window, killing Loria instantly and leaving Valenti seriously injured, after which the gunman disappeared into the night before anyone could react, leaving police confused about the motive because there had been no robbery, no confrontation, and no obvious reason for the violence. At first, investigators believed it might be a single isolated crime, perhaps a personal dispute or a random act of violence that would never repeat itself. But months later, another couple would be attacked in a similar way, and then another, and slowly a terrifying pattern began to emerge, revealing that someone was deliberately targeting young people sitting in cars, choosing moments when they felt safe and relaxed before striking suddenly and vanishing again. As the attacks continued throughout 1976 and into 1977, fear began to spread across the city because the victims seemed to share nothing in common except circumstance. Often young couples enjoying a quiet moment together, sometimes talking, sometimes listening to music, unaware that someone might be watching them from the darkness. Police eventually determined that the same weapon had been used in several of the shootings, a .44 caliber revolver, which led newspapers to create a chilling nickname for the unknown killer, calling him the .44 caliber killer, a name that soon appeared on front pages across New York as reporters followed every development in the investigation, turning the case into a public obsession. But the mystery deepened when letters began arriving at police stations and newspaper offices. Letters written in strange and unsettling language that suggested the killer wanted attention, recognition, and perhaps even fame. And in one of these messages, the writer introduced himself with a name that would soon become infamous across the world, signing the letter simply as the Son of Sam. In one of the most well-known letters, addressed to a New York City police captain, the writer described himself in bizarre and disturbing terms, referring to himself as a monster and speaking about voices that supposedly commanded him to kill, while also mocking the police for their inability to catch him, turning the investigation into a psychological battle as much as a criminal one. The press quickly seized on the name Son of Sam, printing it in bold headlines that fueled public panic while simultaneously turning the killer into a dark celebrity whose identity remained hidden. Behind a curtain of mystery, the attacks continued with terrifying unpredictability, sometimes months apart, sometimes within weeks, and each new shooting intensified the pressure on investigators who were working around the clock trying to identify a suspect among millions of residents in the sprawling city. During this time, the atmosphere in New York changed dramatically because people began altering their behavior out of fear. Young couples avoided parking in secluded areas. Women with long, dark hair reportedly cut or dyed their hair after rumors spread that the killer preferred that appearance. And the idea that anyone could become the next victim created a sense of unease that lingered in neighborhoods across the city. The case dominated newspapers and television broadcasts, and the public watched anxiously as detectives followed leads that ultimately led nowhere, questioning witnesses who had only glimpsed the attacker briefly and gathering fragments of information that seemed frustratingly incomplete. Then, in April 1977, the killer struck again in Queens, wounding a young couple who had been sitting in a car late at night. And once again, he disappeared without leaving behind a clear trail, reinforcing the terrifying possibility that he could continue indefinitely without being caught. The turning point in the investigation came not from a dramatic confrontation, or a heroic chase, but from something far more ordinary, a small detail that might easily have been overlooked if not for the persistence of detectives examining every possible clue. Near one of the crime scenes, police discovered that several parking tickets had been issued in the area on the night of the shooting, and investigators began checking the records, searching for vehicles that might have been parked nearby at suspicious times. A slow and methodical process that eventually led them to a car registered to a man named David Berkowitz. When detectives looked deeper into Berkowitz's background, they discovered that he lived in Yonkers, just outside New York City, and that he owned a vehicle matching the description reported near one of the crime scenes, which immediately raised suspicion and prompted authorities to begin surveillance. On August 10, 1977, police officers approached Berkowitz as he sat inside his car near his apartment building, and when they searched the vehicle, they discovered a .44 caliber revolver, along with other items that connected him directly to the series of shootings that had terrified the city for more than a year. When confronted with the evidence, Berkowitz did not resist arrest and reportedly told officers that they had finally caught him, ending one of the most intense manhunts in New York's history and bringing a sense of relief to a city that had lived under the shadow of fear. During questioning, Berkowitz offered explanations that were as disturbing as the crimes themselves, claiming that he had been following orders from a demon that spoke through the dog of his neighbor, a story that sounded so bizarre that investigators initially wondered whether he was attempting to portray himself as mentally unstable in order to avoid responsibility for his actions. The idea that a demon speaking through a dog had commanded the murders captured public attention and added another layer of mystery to the case. Although many experts believe the story was simply an attempt to create a sensational narrative around the crimes. In 1978, Berkowitz pleaded guilty to 6 murders and several additional shootings. And during the court proceedings, he often behaved in ways that reinforced his reputation as a deeply disturbed individual, smiling at inappropriate moments and making statements that confused both journalists and observers. The judge eventually sentenced him to 6 consecutive life sentences in prison, ensuring that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars for the violence that had devastated so many families and terrified an entire city. In the years that followed, Berkowitz remained a figure of fascination in American true crime history, partly because of the strange letters he had written, and partly because some investigators and writers suggested that the murders might have involved other individuals. Theories that sparked debates about whether Berkowitz had truly acted alone. One of the most controversial books about the case argued that the Son of Sam killings might have been connected to a larger network of occult activity, a theory that captured public imagination but has never been conclusively proven, leaving historians and detectives divided over how much of Berkowitz's story can be believed. While in prison, Berkowitz later claimed that he had undergone a religious conversion, describing himself not as the Son of Sam, but as the Son of Hope. And he began participating in Christian ministry programs within the prison system, writing letters and speaking about faith as a path toward redemption. Despite these claims, he has repeatedly been released. The legacy of the Son of Sam case extends far beyond the crimes themselves because it revealed how fear can spread rapidly through a major city when a killer's identity remains unknown. And it also demonstrated how media coverage can transform a criminal investigation into a cultural phenomenon that captures attention around the world. The case inspired books, films, and documentaries, including the movie Summer of Sam, directed by Spike Lee, which explored the social atmosphere in New York during the time of the murders, portraying not just the killer, but the psychological impact on communities living in fear. Decades later, the story continues to fascinate audiences because it combines elements of mystery, psychology, and history, offering a glimpse into a time when a single, unknown attacker managed to paralyze one of the largest cities in the world. For the families of the victims, however, the story is not simply a piece of history or a topic for documentaries, but a painful reminder of lives lost and futures stolen, tragedies that began on ordinary nights when people believed they were safe. And so the story of David Berkowitz remains one of the most chilling chapters in American criminal history, a reminder that sometimes the greatest fear comes not from monsters imagined in fiction, but from the ordinary individuals who hide among us, unseen until the moment their actions reveal the darkness within.